Now, to wrap up political parties' last push for votes ahead of the general elections on Wednesday, I'm now joined by University of Johannesburg's Dr. Oscar van Heerden. Doctor, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. Now, as we approach the final days before the elections, what key factors are shaping that last push, especially for the major political parties?
Thank you, Katlego. I think that political parties are going to have to come across as convincing. I think the electorate are not stupid. They know that this is the silly season, that political parties make all kinds of promises. But what they need and what they want to see is leadership from various political parties that can convince them that they are actually genuine and honest, and they are making realistic promises in terms of what they can deliver.
Does this apply to those voters that are undecided and are still looking at how their scales would be tipped come Wednesday the 29th?
Especially those voters that are undecided. When you say a job in every home, is that realistic? It has been 30 years. We have been fighting against the grain, swimming upstream with regards to job creation. Various parties, rightfully so, is saying that they are going to create jobs, but is it realistic? The ANC, for example, the governing party, is saying that they are promising 250,000 job opportunities, not actual real jobs, but job opportunities that is going to give some people income. Others are saying they are going to create jobs. The DA, for example, is saying that they've created the most jobs in the Western Cape. When we look at Stats SA and the household survey, we know that not to be true and not to be the case. Everyone is making promises, but I think the electorate out there, especially the undecided voters, are going to have to look at it very carefully and say, who do I believe?
We've seen the emergence of many smaller political parties. How significant is the role of these smaller political parties in these upcoming elections? And what unique contributions can they make to the political landscape as a whole?
Look, I've been very concerned with the mushrooming of small parties. The concerning issue about it, Kashlong, is that huge amounts of money is being made available to these small parties, particularly from private sector, from individuals. And the question we must ask is, to what end? Is it about promoting multi-party democracy, or is it indeed about wanting to fracture the voting blocks that are existing? We know, for example, that there are three major parties within our political landscape: the ANC, the DA, and the EFF. And so the question must be asked, instead of giving money to those three parties and strengthening our democracy, what is the aim of funding so many small parties that don't stand a chance? You look at, for example, Rise Mzansi. They've set a target of 5%, very modest. At the moment, pollings are showing us that they are hovering at about 2%. Are they going to make a difference? Is it going to be impactful? I think we need to really look retrospectively. Do we want a ballot with 50 parties, or do we want a ballot with 5 parties that can much more meaningful contribute to our democracy?
And speaking of these smaller parties and their emergence, especially in these elections, what strategies are they using to differentiate themselves and to gain voter support in this final last stretch before elections? You speak of the polls with Rise being at 2%. What are these strategies that they're implementing in ensuring that voters will certainly vote for them come next week, Wednesday?
Katran, that's a very good question, because the truth of the matter is that if you are not able to get to the electorate, people don't know what you are about. And the truth of the matter is there's practically only 3 parties that really get to most of the wards out there, voting districts. The ANC, for example, is one of the organizations that are present in almost every ward throughout the country. People want to see that you are there, you are knocking on their doors. They might not agree with you, but you are at least there. And unfortunately, some of the smaller parties, because of money, because of resources, they concentrate in the urban areas, they concentrate in the middle class, not the working class out there in the rural areas and beyond. And so, unfortunately, they're not going to garner the votes that they so desperately need.
But in those little votes that they could possibly get, I mean, how do you assess their potential impact on the overall election results and the composition of government, given the possibility of a coalition? Will they play a role in the bigger parties wanting to coalesce with some of these smaller parties in them being able to sit and govern?
Look, what we've seen over the years with coalition politics is that parties that even get less than 1%, we've seen, for example, in the city of Johannesburg, these are parties that you have to take serious, because when it comes to coalition politics, you have to partner with all parties, even big and small. And so, no doubt, look, we don't want to suggest that smaller parties is not important. It just so happens that, for example, there's lots of polling that suggests the ANC might dip below 50%. If it dips below 50%, 56, 57, 58%, it's going to need smaller parties to form a government, to go into a coalition. So you can't disregard the smaller parties. Sometimes, not always, they can be kingmakers.
And what do you see them playing in a role in terms of promoting diversity of ideas and representing those that are underrepresented in terms of segments, even though they would focus on population areas, like you say, in the more urban areas because of the resources that they have?
Look, one of the big concerns that I have, and I've written about this before, is that unfortunately the voters, citizens out there, are still trapped within their lagers. People still vote very much on cultural and racial lines. English-speaking whites predominantly vote for the DA. Afrikaans-speaking whites, predominantly Freedom Front Plus. Your Muslims, Christians, and so forth still vote for those religious parties. It's unfortunate. And I'm saying it's a problem because we're not working towards a cohesive nation building where we look across and beyond race and culture. And this is the problem. And unfortunately, smaller parties like the Patriotic Alliance, like the MK Party, who are very narrow nationalist parties. I mean, MK is trying to attract a very narrow nationalist Zulu vote. PA is opportunistic with the narrow colored vote. This is not helpful for our democracy, and we need to move away from that.
And lastly, Doc, I mean, do you foresee the role of these smaller parties evolving the political landscape as a whole post-elections, regardless of the outcome?
Look, what we can say is that it can only be strengthening our democracy to have opposition parties, big and small. The more parties we have, the more representation we have for our people, the more people feel included. This is a far cry from what we had pre-1994, when the large majority of citizens were excluded from the democratic project. And I think we must encourage it.
All right, Doctor, thank you so much for your time. Certainly very interesting times that we're living in. We'll see on the 29th of May what those outcomes will be. That was Dr. Oscar van Heerden from the University of Johannesburg.